Alexis Levintin is an English professor at the State University of New York at Plattsburgh. You are known and revered in the literary world as one of the most prolific and distinguished translators of Portuguese poetry. And it is nice to have you here with us today. You also, albeit briefly, met J.D.Salinger. And what year was that?
We met in 1968. I had just started teaching at Dartmouth. Dartmouth is in Hanover, New Hampshire. Salinger lived in Cornish for half a century, and Cornish is about 20 minutes south of Dartmouth.
Just a chance meeting? Or?
And, well, we met in a pizza parlor, believe it or not, just the regular pizza hangout. And I think that it was quite unexpected. He just walked up to me, and we ended up talking, and he said, "Why don't you come by for a visit?" And I did visit once. And it was interesting, but this did not become a real friendship or anything like that. It was one visit that was interesting, and then I spoke briefly to him about 8 years later, and that's all. So it's not as if I'm a close buddy or anything like that.
But you met him that one time. Was it because you were an English professor? Or?
No, I think it was, we had mutual friends out there in those country roads down there in Cornish. I knew people nearby, and I think it was because of that he had seen me around. Certainly, my impression is that if anything, he would have held it against me that I was an English professor, so that when we did talk, I tried not to talk to him as if I were an English professor. I mean, I didn't ask him English professorial academic questions.
So when you went to his home in Cornish, not many people have. What was that like, and what do you talk about with a man like J.D.Salinger?
It was very interesting. He lives on a back road, or he lived on a back road, and I don't even know the name of that back road. It's not easy to find his house, and he lives on a house on a hill, a steep hill, and you drive up a driveway that is unmarked, and the driveway dead ends at a garage. And way above the garage is his house. And there's no path whatsoever. So that is a sign of his insularity, his desire to not be troubled, not be bothered, not to be connected with the world. If I remember correctly, since he had invited me, he knew I was coming. I beeped my horn. Mm-hmm. He came out on his deck. He looked down, and I believe he opened the garage door with a automatic,
garage door opener.
A garage door opener, exactly. And then in the garage was a sort of underground passageway that went from the garage through the hillside up to his house. And so that's how I got up there. And when I entered, I think he offered me a scotch, but it's not the clearest thing in my memory because I'm not a big-time drinker. Mm-hmm. I think he offered me a scotch, and immediately after that, this is what he said, and this is what I really remember, and I believe it's the most important thing that I can tell about Salinger. His first words were, "Well, there's really nothing to talk about, but God is there." So this is very interesting because I think he is an absolutist. I think he's a purist. I think he's a man seeking perfection. And to say there's nothing to talk about but God is to sweep away almost all the concerns of ordinary people in their daily lives. I think he hated trivia. And I think he considered the conversation of most ordinary people nothing but a barrage of trivia. And so that was, for me, the most important thing he said. I did mention his writing. I said, "Gosh, what a pity that you haven't written since 1965. That's when I think Seymour, in Introduction, and Raise High, the Roof Beams Carpenters came out. I said, "What a pity you haven't written in all these years." And he looked at me astonished and said, "What are you talking about? I write every day." It's just that I haven't published since then. The worst thing I ever did was publish. I'm never going to publish again. So those are the two interesting things he said to me. He didn't fully explain why he hated publishing, but I think I can explain it. Once you publish, what you wrote is no longer entirely your own. It becomes, in a way, the property of the people who read you. And I think he didn't like exactly, he didn't fully like the idea that other people could modify what he had written in their own minds and in their own hearts. In a sense, the purity of his quest is contaminated or compromised by the public dimension. And so he spent the rest of his life basically writing for himself. Now, whether we will get to see what he wrote in those ensuing decades, I just don't know. I know nothing about that, and like everyone else, I'm quite curious. I rather suspect, however, that he's the type of guy who said what he had to say. That the first 9 short stories, Banana Fish, For Esme with Love and Squalor, those absolutely marvelously achieved stories, plus Catcher in the Rye, I think that he basically said what he had to say about childhood, about innocence, about the loss of innocence, about growing up, and about the society in which we live.
Do you think he was pleased by the success of Catcher in the Rye, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think he had completely mixed emotions about it. Obviously, Catcher in the Rye enabled him to live the rest of his life without any worries. It was translated into 26 languages. To this very day, it's selling at least 250,000 copies every year, probably more if you take into account foreign sales.
65+ million over the years?
Yes. I think that the income from Catcher in the Rye gave him total freedom, and surely he could not regret that freedom. On the other hand, it made him famous, and he may have enjoyed the fame in the very beginning. I wouldn't know. After all, in the very beginning, I was a child, and I certainly didn't know him.
Right.
But the way he lived his whole life in Cornish, really a recluse, suggests that he very quickly soured on fame, or on the consequences of fame. And I can describe one other thing that might be of interest to your viewers. He lived in 2 houses. The first house, where he lived a married life and raised 2 children and so on, and then the second house after his divorce. The first house was hidden behind a palisade, or a high wooden fence that was about 6 feet high, so that from the road you couldn't really see the house, and from the house you couldn't really see the road. And that tells you something about his desire for isolation.